Since the coup occurred in Niger on July 26, which toppled Western puppet Mohamed Bazoum, all attention has been on France's relationship with Niger, which is quite understandable given that 1. France was Niger's former colonial master, and 2. The neo-colonial attitude of France towards Niger led to the build-up of anti-French sentiments. But not much attention has been paid to the biggest and strongest Western power, the US, which has made itself comfortable despite all that has been happening in the region. It seems as if the US is just in the background, observing all that is happening. Even when the coups happened in Mali and Burkina Faso, the US was not affected, only France. There was no anti-US sentiment. But the fact is, the US is no different from France and even more dangerous because, unlike France, their operations in Africa, which are to protect their interests, are more covert. And so our opinion is that the only way Africa can be free is to kick them and any other Western powers out of the continent because their presence in the continent indicates that somehow they are directing how things would play out in Africa. Let's take a look at some facts that buttress this point. When the coup first occurred in Niger, the US, France, and the international community condemned the coup and called for the quick restoration of democratic rule. But this is where things began to be different between the reactions of France and the US. While France recognized the situation in Niger as a coup and then sided with the regional bloc, accrues, for a possible military intervention, the US reaction was quite different. According to an official at the time, the US did not recognize the situation as a coup, which would have required them to cut foreign and military assistance to Niger. Instead, they saw it as a takeover that occurred as a result of an internal domestic dispute between Bazoum and the head of the Presidential Guard, General Abdourahmane Tiani, who was appointed by the previous president and believed he was going to be dismissed. And so, their policy towards Niger was different. No sanctions were imposed by the US, and according to a senior official, the Pentagon was engaging in strategic patience as we monitor the situation and see how it resolves itself. That means their efforts were focused on diplomacy to restore democratic rule. But then, 6 weeks later, there were reports that the US troops might be withdrawing from Niger because it had become obvious that the military government of Niger was not leaving. According to the official who made this report, ultimately, as many as half of the 1,100 troops stationed in Niger could be pulled from the country, although a final decision has not been made. He also said that the removal of some troops from Niger could start in the coming weeks, but then he said something that should be taken note of. He said that, even so, the Pentagon's goal is to maintain a military presence in Niger for as long as possible. The big question is, why? Obviously, they would say that the reason for the military presence in Niger and other parts of Africa is to help fight anti-terrorist attacks. But that's just a big lie, because how can they say that with all the US intelligence, equipment, and machinery, they are still helping to fight terrorists who do not have the same sophisticated weapons as they do for years? It doesn't even make any sense. If they wanted to end the terrorist attacks, they would have done so already, but it's obvious that ending the terrorist attacks is not part of their plan, even though they use that as a front to maintain their military presence. The truth is, if they do end terrorism in the Sahel region, there would be no need for them to continue to maintain a military base in the region that they need. We will come back to this later, but fast forward to October 10th, after France has been told to leave Niger and the first batch of the French army has started to withdraw. On this day, the US made a decision and officially declared that a coup occurred in Niger. And with this designation, they cut off more than $500 million in assistance to Niger. They finally showed their true colors. According to the official statement, the coup toppled a democratic government, which they saw as a defense against Russia. In simple terms, the coup removed their puppet. The US Department official spokesman, Matthew Miller, stated that any resumption of US assistance will require action by the National Council for Safeguarding the Homeland to usher in democratic governance in a quick and credible timeframe. This means they would only resume aid to Niger if the military government restored democratic governance. Recall that prior to this time, The US and France, together with the international community, had been putting pressure on the military government of Niger to restore the deposed president, but they refused. And so, the reason the US gave for why it decided to cut aid to Niger is that they have exhausted all available avenues to restore democratic governance. We're taking this action because, over the last 2 months, we've exhausted all available avenues to preserve the constitutional order in Niger, a senior US official stated. The official added that the coup leaders, under their own rules when declaring an emergency, have to restore civilian and democratic rule within 90 to 120 days. But, as time has passed, it's become clear that the CNSP officials we've been dealing with did not want to abide by these constitutional guidelines, and so the US decided to call it a coup and cut off aid. Well, this is their official statement, but we do not believe it because why did it take them so long to call the coup a coup? In our opinion, it's all part of their strategy. The US might say that they cut off aid to Niger because they condemn coups and respect democratic government, but based on history, the US has supported coups in different countries around the world countless times. Some of which they even helped to orchestrate, all in the name of protecting their interests. They did it in Cuba in 1993, in Iran in 1953, in Guatemala in 1954, and in the Congo from 1960 to 1965, just to name a few. In Congo, the US, through the CIA, helped to assassinate Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of the country, and supported Mobutu's coup to take over the Republic of the Congo in the name of preventing the spread of communism. Mobutu became a dictator who ruled the country until 1997, but the US never called him a dictator. Instead, he was an ally, and the US was his chief patron, providing him with about $2 billion in foreign assistance. So, you see, it couldn't possibly be that the US took some time before they called the situation in Niger a coup just because they were trying to restore democratic rule. The fact is, if the military government proved itself ready to be a puppet for the US, they wouldn't have called it a coup. They would have come up with something to justify why the coup happened. So, in our opinion, the US did not only try to restore their former puppet during those times they refused to acknowledge the coup in Niger, they also tried to gain another puppet in the military government, but they did not succeed, hence the reason for cutting aid to Niger. The aid cut off to Niger included $200 million that was already suspended and a $442 million package through the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which supports developing countries that abide by democratic norms, that was meant to improve roads and trade routes for agriculture in one of the world's poorest countries. In other words, this package only accrues to African countries that do what they say. It's high time that African countries stop taking aid from Western nations because this assistance comes with conditions that are detrimental to the continent and have made it the way it is today. Now, the aid cut off to Niger also means that the US troops, which are about 1,000 in number, are no longer actively training or assisting Nigerian forces but continue to work to monitor threats from jihadists. But is that truly all they are doing? On October 26, the US made a decision that again showed their true colors. A senator in the US, Republican Senator Rand Paul, sponsored a bill that would have forced President Joe Biden to withdraw US troops from Niger, which would have been awesome news, but on Thursday, October 26, the US Senate overwhelmingly rejected the bill. The measure was rejected by 86 to 11. According to Senator Ben Cardin, the Democratic chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, if Americans withdraw, it could leave a vacuum that could be filled by Russia or its partner, the Wagner mercenaries. Did you hear that? The US is not in Niger to fight terrorists. They don't even care about it, or else they would have ended it. They need to be in Niger because, 1, they do not want Russia, which they consider a threat to having any power in Niger and, by extension, Africa. This is why they are very concerned about any Russian relationship with Africa. Secondly, the US has a base in Agadez, Niger, which it uses for surveillance missions and to gather intelligence not just on terrorist attacks but intelligence across Africa. In simple terms, the base is a perfect place to spy on the African continent. The base, known as Niger Air Base 201, is an expansive drone base and is the second largest US base in Africa after its permanent base in Djibouti. Built and financed by the US, the base has been operational with high-tech satellite communication systems since 2019. The US invested $110 million in construction and $30 million annually for maintenance. The base functions as a primary intelligence and surveillance center for the Sahel region. From this base, they can get all the information, either political or economic, from African countries and make decisions that will protect American interests. It's these military bases that the US has all over Africa that enable them to gather information and plan covert missions, which sometimes end in the assassination of formidable African leaders. So, while France's policy towards Africa seems to be more obvious, the US's is subtle, but the end product is the same. Western countries are not friends of Africa. If Africa is to be great, then all of them should be kicked out, especially the US. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comment section down below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.